Good morning, everyone. This is Kim Brown with the Rural Institute. We'll get started in just a minute. Just making sure that everyone who wants to attend is getting logged on. And as soon as, oh, good, we still have a few more logging on and then we will get started. Okay, it looks like the logging on has slowed down, so we will get started. Again, welcome to everyone. I am Kim Brown with the Rural Institute for Inclusive Communities, Transition and Employment Projects, and with the Montana Deafblind Project. And Teresa Baldry and I will be your moderators for today. Live captioning is available for today's session. To access the captions, open the captioning link that you should see in your chat or question box, and you'll want to open that link in a new window. If you don't see the chat or question box on your screen, look to the upper right-hand side of your screen. There should be a small orange box with a white arrow in it. Click on that, and that will open your dashboard, and then you should see your chat area. Again, the link for captions is there. When you click on that link in a separate browser window, it will open the captions, and then you can resize that browser window. The captions scroll up from the bottom, so you may want to make the caption box small and put it at the bottom of your webinar screen. That way you'll be able to see the presenter, the slides, and the captions. We also have American Sign Language interpretation available today. You should see our interpreter in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and you can expand or hide that webcam image according to your needs. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Montana Transition Resources Project, which is funded through a contract with Children's Special Health Services at the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. The statements shared in today's presentation do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the department. All attendees are currently muted. If you want to ask the presenter a question or make a comment, please type your question or comment into the chat or question box. We do have Teresa moderating that box, and she will make sure that your question gets answered. For those of you who requested Montana Office of Public Instruction renewal units when you registered, those will be emailed to you after the webinar, and it can take up to a couple of weeks to get those sent out. You do have to have pre-registered in order to receive the OPI credit. A certificate of attendance link will be included in a follow-up email that you will receive from GoToWebinar tomorrow. So if you need a certificate of attendance, that should arrive automatically in your email tomorrow. Today's session is being recorded for the Transition and Employment Projects Resource Library. By participating in the webinar, you grant permission for any chats and/or questions that you submit through the webinar platform to be recorded. The video for today's webinar will be posted to our Transition and Employment Projects Training Archives page, and I'll put that link in the chat box in just a few minutes. It can take up to a couple of weeks for us to get those videos posted because we do want to make sure that the captions are all accurate and that the video is working smoothly before we post it. The handouts for today's session will be posted to that same website. Unfortunately, I was not able to get them up for today. However, they are available for you in the handouts section right here on GoToWebinar. So again, if you go to your dashboard, you'll see a section called handouts. If you click on that, there are 5 handouts that Dr. Carter has provided for today. I will also get those posted to our website within the next couple of days. If you missed our first webinar on November 1st with Dr. Carter, be sure to visit our website and view that recording. Again, we don't have it posted yet. We're still doing some finishing work on that, but it should be up within the next few days. We ask that you complete a short evaluation after the webinar, and I will put the evaluation link in the chat or question box toward the end of today's session. The link will also be in the follow-up email that you receive tomorrow from GoToWebinar. Please do take the time to fill out that evaluation. It helps guide us in our work, and it helps make sure that we are offering you presentations that are really useful to you in your work and in your life. And with that, I will go ahead and be quiet and introduce our speaker. We are delighted to have back with us today, Dr. Erik Carter. Dr. Carter is the Luther Sweet Endowed Chair in Disabilities at Baylor University and Executive Director of the Baylor Center for Developmental Disabilities. His research addresses strategies for supporting inclusion and belonging in schools, workplaces, and congregations for children and adults with disabilities. He has published widely in the areas of educational and transition services, including more than 300 articles, chapters, and other publications. You can read more about Dr. Carter's work on his website, and I will put that link in the chat box as well. With that, I would like to turn the presentation over to Dr. Carter, who is so committed that he is actually presenting to us today, far away from his home in a motel room. Dr. Carter, over to you.
Thank you, Kim and Teresa, and to the Montana Transition Resources Project and the Rural Institute. Thank you for allowing me to join you again. It's great to be with you among virtually, presently, and in recorded form later, educators and leaders and family members and advocates who I know care deeply about the thriving of youth and young adults all throughout Montana. And I think, as I've said before, this is the work that matters most, helping young people catch this vision of flourishing, a flourishing future, and then to be able to navigate the uncertain and often windy path from here to there. That's really the heart of our work in this field of transition. It's equipping middle school and high school students with disabilities for a good life after high school, and hopefully we would even say an abundant life after high school. And many of you probably recognize what I just said in flowery language as really at the heart of our primary purpose of special education. It's what we send students to school through age 18 or 22 to prepare students for further education and employment and independent living. It's at the heart of the purposes of education and special education. And in our field of transition, we often talk about this notion of pursuing good post-school outcomes, which is what I've labeled in bold and italicized up on the screen. And this is important work, absolutely, no doubt. There are too many young people with disabilities who are missing out on these opportunities to continue their learning in college and beyond, or to obtain a great, meaningful job, or to live independently, or to enjoy all that their community might have to offer. And these are important aspects of thriving and flourishing for young people who are coming through our schools and launching into adulthood. And these are things we call outcomes in the work that we do. These are things that schools and state agencies and other organizations track, and we call them outcomes, and they are important, good things for us to know about. We want to know whether young people are getting jobs and living in the community and going on to lifelong learning and engaged in the communities in meaningful and important ways to them. That's important work, and again, at the heart of the purpose of special education. But in conversations really about flourishing and how we help people live good and abundant lives, if we're going to talk about flourishing, we have to get beyond just outcomes and start talking more than just about where you go to work and where you go to school and merely where you live, all of which are very important things. But when people talk about the things that really bring them life, and the things that matter most to them individually, those conversations start to turn towards things like having enduring friendships and intimate relationships, on being able to have opportunities to make a difference and impact the lives of others, to find a place in community where you feel needed and have purpose and meaning, and then being able to steer your life in the ways and directions you choose to be self-determining and self-directed. To have good health, to feel well, to be safe, to be part of a caring community, and to find this place of belonging. These are some of the markers that we often talk about of a flourishing life. And I'm starting here because I think it's one thing to know whether our students have good outcomes, but it's even better to know whether they're experiencing good lives, however they define them that for themselves. And if you are familiar with some of the work of Ann and Red Turnbull, they often talk about this as an enviable life, the kind of life that someone else might also want to have for themselves. And this is really important because these actually go together in important ways. They're not separate conversations. Having a good job and living in a neighborhood or in a town or a county and having lifelong learning opportunities and involvement in your community, those actually are the places where young people have the opportunities to develop friendships and to live out their vocation and to meet a loved one and to contribute in valued roles, to grow in their faith, and hopefully to find that place of belonging. And so what you start to see is when we put all of these on the plate together of things we want to pursue, you start to realize that as educators or even as service providers, we have to work closely with others in our communities if we're going to bring these things to pass. In other words, a service system can't make all these things happen. It takes communities to be places of belonging and contribution. And we have to figure out how service systems work with and alongside communities to bring these to pass so that the young people in our midst can have satisfying jobs and close relationships, so that they can have a comfortable and safe place to live and maybe pursue some kind of post-secondary degree, so they can have involvement in their community and a chance to give something back, so they can find friends they can count on or someone to love, so they can have a say in their own lives or even have an influence on the lives of others, so they can have an opportunity to be part of a caring faith community, just so they can have a great, even killer future to look forward to. So these are the aspirations of young people with disabilities in our schools, in our communities. They want the same things that any other young person in Montana wants. They want to have a good life like anyone else. And it's interesting because the data from some national studies really bear this out. These aren't just anecdotes. They're actually sort of borne out in the studies that ask young people with various disabilities what they hope for in those early years after graduation. In one of those studies, they found that 94% of high school students who had an intellectual disability expected to have a paid job in those early years after graduation. That's 94%. That was their expectation. And they didn't have dreams of underemployment or unemployment, or they didn't aspire to piece rate wages. They didn't expect to be excluded from the workforce. They have gifts and talents and passions to bring to the world of work, and they want to bring it. And they don't want just any job. They want a job that brings meaning and purpose and enjoyment. And half of all high school students with intellectual disabilities say they expect to go on to some kind of post-secondary education after high school. And they don't want to miss out on lifelong learning opportunities and tailgate parties and new experiences and a real career pathway. And the same thing is in the area of independent living. About almost three quarters of high school students with intellectual disability have these aspirations to live on their own in some way in early adulthood. And they want to have more than just life on the couch. They want to have life and to live life well. So these are the aspirations of young people, and some of you on this webinar are young people yourselves, or you're in the midst of them, and you should ask those questions too. What's important to you after high school and beyond? But that raises the challenge for us. How do we help our communities move from being places of exclusion and segregation and separation to becoming places of inclusion and belonging for our students and the young people that we serve and support? And this is the recap of the last webinar, which if you weren't part of, you remember this set of images of how we're trying to move towards opening up our communities in ways so that people aren't just present in all of the parts of their community, but they have a real presence and shared lives with others in those communities. So that's the topic of today's webinar, is how do we connect students to communities of belonging? And as one other related recap then to that, we talked about there being 10 kind of markers of belonging for young people with disabilities that are actually 10 markers of belonging for any young person, irrespective of whether they have a disability or not. And those were to be present in your community, to be involved each and every day in the same places as other young people your age, to be part of your community in the full breadth that it offers, to be invited, to have your presence and participation sought out by others. To belong is to be welcomed, so to be received with eagerness and warmth and hospitality and authentic delight. And then to be known, to be seen as a unique individual and appreciated for all of who you are, and to be known by your gifts and your strengths and your passions, and not merely by the things that are hard or our struggles. To belong is also to be accepted, to be embraced gladly and viewed as an equal, and then to be supported, to have the kinds of resources you need to participate fully and meaningfully in everyday activities, to have your voice heard, which is to have your perspective sought and listened to and respected. And then belonging is more than just those things that are more postures of communities. They're also relational components of community. So to belong is to be befriended, to have relationships with other people your age who that are marked by this mutual affection and reciprocity, where people choose you back. And then to be needed, to be seen as valued by others and considered an indispensable member of your community. And then finally, to belong is to be part of communities that love you back, that love you deeply and unconditionally as well. So if you missed the first webinar, you're already caught up. We're trying to help young people be part of communities of belonging, and we're trying to help communities live out this commitment to be in a place where people are present and invited and welcomed and known and accepted and supported and heard and befriended and needed and loved. So a successful transition really involves trying to find a purposeful place in the world where young people can experience these dimensions of belonging. So how do we help young people find their place of belonging, maybe in their workplaces or in their communities, or even still while they're in their schools? Well, that's what I wanted to extend the conversation today. And just to illustrate some possibilities and pathways from some of our past projects, and maybe to just kind of activate your imagination a little bit. So I'm going to talk about projects that focused on belonging in three contexts: in people's congregations, in their communities, and if there's time, I'll get to schools, but don't worry, if we don't get there, plenty of resources in the handouts that will point you to some other recorded webinars you can watch. And again, this is just to illustrate possibilities. This is not a prescription for you in your town or your county for what you should do. So I'm going to start with employment and the context of congregations. And yeah, so let's start with that world of work. A good job makes a huge difference in the lives of young people. It's more than just a paycheck, although it's a paycheck too. But young people with disabilities get connected to meaningful work experiences. When that happens in their communities, all those other aspirations that we talked about can become more likely. A good job contributes to that sense of accomplishment and self-worth and independence. It gives young people a place to share their strengths and to share their gifts in valued ways. And it can be a place that fosters new friendships and creates access to social supports. And it can also provide resources and connections that increases someone's community involvement and contributions. So we really encourage connections to the world of work, not just because of that paycheck, but because of all those other wonderful kind of collateral benefits that come from that. Well, getting people into the world of work is a real challenge. And so several years ago, we worked on a project called Putting Faith to Work, which really started to think about who are people's natural supports and connections in their local community, and how do we invite those communities to play a role in helping people flourish maybe in their workplace. This particular project involved inviting faith communities to help their members with developmental disabilities connect their gifts and talents into the workplace, and through that path to help find communities of belonging in the community. So congregations, as many of you know, are actually these networks of people who are connected to places of employment all throughout your county or town or city. It's filled with employers and employees, and they're invested in helping their own members to thrive. And I think they can often get to know people with disabilities in ways maybe that a service system never really could. But they're rarely asked to use that commitment that they have and their connections to address pressing needs for people with disabilities in their midst. So in our work with 25 congregations, we found that nearly 60 young people with developmental disabilities were connected to jobs that matched their interests and their passions and their sense of calling through the ordinary movements of a congregation outside of the formal investments of a service system, which came from really inviting congregations to use their assets in new ways. So this is actually something that surprisingly maybe congregations have the capacity to do, but have to be invited and asked and equipped to do well. Here's what I mean when I say they maybe already have the capacity. So in a lot of our rural communities, faith communities are actually, if you think about it, one of the most extensive networks of employers and employees in any community. The median size faith community in the United States is about 88 people. So half of all congregations are less than 100 people. But even in a small congregation, think about how many employers in that community might be represented. There might be someone who works at the local college, someone who coordinates the nonprofit network in your county, someone who just does odd jobs around town and knows lots of people or needs someone to help. Maybe there's someone who operates a daycare, and on and on and on. Your congregations are filled with people who between Sundays or Saturdays or whenever they worship are also in the workplace. And these are employers and employees who are connected to organizations and businesses in every corner of your state and county, who may be inclined to actually help one of their own members who's someone in their congregation. But the gift that they perhaps have never thought they had to share with people with disabilities is actually their connections. And many of the jobs that would be represented, for example, in a congregation are ones that job developers who are working in state agencies are unlikely to know about. And because one of the big challenges of connecting to employment is finding employers willing to make the hire, what starts to happen when we begin to tap in networks that people are already in the midst of and start inviting them to think about, could you potentially hire someone who is a member of your congregation who also happens to have a disability? So there's a lot of potential employers in a congregation, but it's more than that. Actually, congregations are also associations of people who are also connected to lots of other people. And so if you think about, again, another congregation of kind of made up connections they may have, they are members of other groups and know lots and lots of other people. And it's through personal connections that most people get their jobs. Many of us got our first jobs, maybe even our current job, through someone that we knew. And if the average person knows around 150 to 600 people, for example, think about the network that exists within local faith communities in your town as well. Multiply that times the membership of your congregation. And then you start to sort of, if you spend time getting to know a young person's aspirations and strengths, you start asking people, do you know someone who would need someone like this? Do you know someone who knows someone who could use someone with these strengths? Do you know someone who would use someone who is looking for someone who has this passion in this particular vocational area? And the last thing that's kind of interesting about congregations, and this one is just a picture, these are just pictures of random congregations, is that there are lots of capacity within a congregation to help people find and connect to those jobs. Think about the talents and experiences that might exist in a local congregation that might just be what someone needs to make that employment connection. There's someone who could mentor someone in a particular field, could drive them to an interview, who can help them craft their resume or practice for an interview, who can encourage them because they know what it's like to be out of work, who could practice interviewing or just make connections and do good asking. So lots of connections there as well. And what's interesting is in Montana, there are 1,766 congregations all throughout the state. What does it look like for each of them maybe to come alongside one of their members, like this community in Tennessee did for Kate, who had volunteer positions, but had never held a paid job? And Kate, along with her family, several members of the congregation who knew Kate, and several congregations who didn't know Kate but were well connected to their community, came together for sort of a employment planning meeting or a person-centered planning meeting to get to know Kate. And they asked some simple but powerful questions. What are the strengths and the gifts and passions and sense of calling that Kate has that we should consider as we think about what would be a meaningful job? What are the prior experiences that we should remember when we think about what kinds of job might be a fit for her, where she's volunteered or served in her church, or other prior experiences she had in school? What are the kinds of job responsibilities that, knowing Kate, we think would be a really good fit for her? And then to start to say, given all that we know, what are some of the possible businesses and organizations in our community where those kinds of jobs exist? And who should we talk to in our congregation or beyond who works in just such a place, or knows someone who works in such a place, or shops in a place, or is connected to someone who could use someone with those strengths and gifts? And then they began to think, what supports would Kate need to be successful in that job? And then how could we as a group begin to do the kind of networking and question asking and connecting that might lead Kate to a connection in the community? All of that was done over a couple hours of some dinner and desserts and good conversation, and they took notes. All of this you can download. And out of that, they decided to put together a one-page profile for Kate. Some of you have seen these before. This is the version they used where it listed out Kate's skills that they learned about through those conversations, all the strengths and talents she could bring to the workplace. In the middle, they put some words that describe Kate, all of the positive qualities and gifts that she could bring. And on the right, all the things they knew about the support she would need to be successful in the workplace. And they begin to circulate that to members of the congregation. Can you think of a place that Kate would really shine? And it turns out that someone at that church that she attended worked at a local university and was responsible for hiring many of the staff all around the campus, particularly those who turned over the dorms in the summer when they did conferences and events. And he said, I know Kate. I never thought about Kate as needing someone who needed a job, and I'm in the position to hire her. I know exactly who I'd like to pair with. Paired Kate up with one of his best employees, and Kate got a really great job, making a pretty good wage at the time in a job that she really loved, working in a highly social place. And she began to make connections and develop relationships there, all through a group of people coming alongside, trying to discern who she is, and then network through their connections to find a place for Kate in the community. Saw the same thing for Katie in also a church outside of Nashville, Tennessee, where again they gathered, they did some visualization of the kinds of things people were saying. They had a little art student, high school student who was an artist, draw some of the things that they were hearing as they did that planning process. And for Kate, they decided to put together a reverse job ad, and this is what it looked like, where it was a help wanted or a job wanted ad that described Kate, talked about how she served in the faith community and the kinds of jobs she was looking for. And again, people began to network. They shared this with folks in the men's ministry and the women's ministry and the different groups that were part of the congregation. And several people said, I know of a place that would be really great for Kate. She tried out a few places through those experiences. Not all of them turned out, but she ended up landing in a beauty salon that was a really great fit for her, matched her interests, and was in the working with an employer who is part of that congregation. So it was a really caring, supportive environment as well. And she didn't need a job coach or service provider to make that happen. It again came through those networks. So lots of examples of what that might look like. Some one congregation did this for another transition age youth named Clayton. They had a little blog on their church where they did updates, and they featured Clayton and his resume and what he was looking for. And you can see the picture of the team that gathered. It turned out someone in that church worked with the Nashville Predators, and he was a huge sports fan, but through that connection to the Predators said, hey, come on down, we definitely have a job for you, connected him right away, and made a great employee. In fact, and the Predators decided that he was such a great employee, they committed to hiring other young people with Down syndrome as well. So this is kind of what I'm talking about. How do we think about tapping into people becoming known, figuring out how they might be supported, and then connecting them to communities where they're needed and where they may be actually loved as well. So it's not merely about the paycheck. It's about all the other things that families and young people say are important to them about work, about the way it instills pride and furthers independence and provides purpose and contributes, yes, to fiscal independence, but introduces valued roles, sparks joy. These are just things that we've learned in our research with families about what work does in terms of promoting the flourishing of young people with developmental disabilities, all the things that work does for anyone, including providing a place of belonging. So it's just one example. Again, it's not the thing you must do or you ought to do, but a way to illustrate that sometimes these natural networks in our local communities can be hubs and points of connection that we can introduce people to the kinds of experiences in their community that matter. So what does this have to do with belonging? Well, definitely people got connected to jobs where they experienced that sense of belonging. But what's also fascinating about this project that we didn't expect is that as congregations came alongside their members with developmental disabilities in ways they actually hadn't before, they'd certainly had them, supported them maybe to be part of the church. But what they started to discover is here's a person with gifts and talents who could be serving in our congregation and serving others and becoming known and needed within the congregation. And through those experiences of serving and being more part of the life of their congregation, also began to become befriended and loved as well. So sometimes our pursuit of one thing introduces us to a number of other things that also matter as well. So wonderful lessons that we've learned from trying to engage faith communities in this work. And we've got a guide you can download completely free called Putting Faith to Work, a guide for congregations and communities that walks through what this looks like, has examples of the kinds of questions and person-centered planning tools that you might draw upon. But here's one more spin on this. You could also think about your faith community not just as a place filled with employers, but also people who are have lots of passions and interests. And so again, here's sort of a silly example of that. But if you took a congregation and thought about these are all the things that people in that congregation love to do, here's how you start to think about making social connections. What for this young person with a disability are the things that she loves to do for fun, that she shows she loves to watch, the music she listens to, the hobbies she pursues, the sports she follows, the places she loves to spend time, and then ask yourself who in this congregation loves those very same things, who can help me find those people, and can I begin to make connections to those individuals? And that becomes the way we're fostering relationships within a community, of finding out shared perseverations and passions and interests and hobbies and introducing others on that basis. So the same logic might apply to not just faith communities, but also how do you engage that kind of connections in your civic groups, like your Lions and Kiwanis and Knights of Columbus and Moose, which are also networks of people who are connected to employers who know people and can make connections when they've come to know a young person with disabilities. How might you partner with them to do that kind of connecting? Or thinking about your chambers of commerce as networks of employers, that you might share those one-page profiles or job wanted ads at chamber meetings and begin to see how might that open up possibilities in your community and introducing young people to folks who've never had the chance to meet them or think about disability kind of in this light of having strengths and contributions to be made. So that's one example within a congregational context. Another that's been really, I think, encouraging for communities we've worked with, particularly smaller towns and counties and more rural communities, is something we've been calling community conversation events, ways of bringing together a cross-section of your local community to begin to think more holistically about how do we open up opportunities in our city or in our county so that more young people with disabilities can be active, vital members of this particular community. And communities are filled, interestingly, with lots of great assets that we don't often tap into. People who have great ideas and connections and opportunities that we might be overlooking when we rely entirely on our service systems to promote, to make connections to the community. So how do we engage civic groups and employers and community leaders and congregations and general, like generic community networks and families to aim their collective efforts towards opening up employment opportunities or community involvement opportunities or social connections in ways that lead to belonging. So I thought what I do here is just illustrate what this has looked like in one small community in Tennessee called Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. I don't know if anyone's been to Tennessee or been there, but this is a town of around 12,000 people in Lawrence County. This is near an Amish community. It was a small town once home to Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier, and a tight-knit community with a real heart. And they responded to this invitation to start thinking about how they could open up their community to expand opportunities for young people with disabilities in that town. And one of the prominent people in that community is named Tommy Lee Kidd, and his wife were really convinced that young people with intellectual disability, like their daughter Abigail, should have a chance to share their gifts and talents in the workplace when they grow up. And in fact, in one of our studies, we found that's the hopes of most parents. 87% of parents hold that expectation for their children with disabilities, a real job for real pay. And so Tommy Lee, along with his small planning team, knew the power of relationships, and they began to invite people all throughout Lawrenceburg to come to a community conversation one evening in Lawrence County about how to open up employment opportunities for people with disabilities. They personally invited people, and a lot of people showed up. 98 people from that community, all corners of the community, thought that was a conversation worth having. And they came probably because Tommy Lee and others called them and said, you really need to be here. We need your perspective. And they gathered in this little banquet hall in their town square of the county seat. And in this Providence banquet hall, they picked it because it was a kind of a conducive place to gather with friends to talk about an issue mattered. It was kind of a neutral place and a known place. And when you walked in, you would see Abigail and one of the other young girls in that community welcome you with a warm smile. They would give you your name tag. You'd put a sticker on your name tag to tell you which of the different hats you wore in your community. And you notice there's a lot of different stickers, but you notice there's a lot of people there at the event who weren't working in the service system, who weren't thinking about how could vocational rehabilitation help with jobs. They were thinking from the perspective of just an ordinary community member. So you'd sign in, you'd get your name tag, you'd go get some desserts, because that's really important to have good, tasty, free desserts. You'd sit down at a table with decorated nicely, maybe with some chocolates on it. And in the background, they had a couple people playing some music to kind of set the vibe, including a young man who's autistic, sharing his talents to kind of create the right atmosphere. And you'd see a bunch of people in your community that you maybe know and some you don't know. And then after everyone had gathered, Tommy Lee, the host for the evening, called everyone to the conversation and said, shared why it was so important for Lawrenceburg to find a place for the gifts and talents and contributions of people with disabilities, not just for his daughter Abigail, who's still a bit young to work. She was 13 at the time, but for 19% of their community that had a disability, or for the 1 in 3 households who had at least one family member with disability. So we really cast this as a community effort. And he explained how the evening would work, that there'd be 3 rounds of discussion at tables, round tables of 5 to 6 people around 2 kind of primary questions. What could we do as a community to increase meaningful employment opportunities for people with disabilities? And how could we work together in compelling ways to make these ideas happen here in our community? And then he rang a bell and the conversations began. And around these tables of 5 to 6 people, people began to brainstorm their very best ideas for what this might look like in Lawrenceburg. You had employers and family members and civic leaders and community leaders and faith communities all sharing their ideas for what this might look like. And at every table, there was someone who would write down every single idea that was shared. And after about 15 minutes, someone would ring a bell, everyone would get up, switch tables, sit down with new people, and continue sharing their ideas of things that businesses could do. You'd have employers talking about their ideas for preparing youth with disabilities, agencies talking about the supports they could provide, civic leaders talking about how we change community attitudes, and parents talking about their hopes and expectations. Every idea that's shared got written down. After about 15, 20 minutes, someone rang a bell, everyone got up, sat down with new people, and they changed the question to how might we work together to make this happen here in our town of Lawrenceburg. And now people started to think about actions they could take collectively. Lots of creative ideas shared, everyone written down. And for the last 20 minutes of the evening, table by table, one at a time, someone would get up and share the very best ideas they heard that evening. The ideas that seemed most doable, that had the most energy, that really made sense locally for their community. And sometimes those ideas related to how they design and deliver formal services, but often there were ideas about natural supports that could be tapped in to create opportunities. And what was really interesting is over 2 hours, with 98 people, some coffee and good desserts, and a design for a conversation focused on possibilities, they ended up with 273 ideas that they generated that night. All of those got written down. Many of them were put together in a little guide that got shared back with the whole community. And that conversation became the catalyst for movement they made over the next couple years of different things they began to do to open up opportunities. You'll have more time to read this in the handouts when you download those, but they had ideas for how to develop new employment opportunities, for how to undertake more community-wide awareness efforts, to strengthen school and transition services, to make sure young people were graduating more competitive for the workforce, and how to take employers that were already hiring people with disabilities and expand and encourage and reinforce those efforts, and even to support families also in this process of preparing their young people for the world of work and beyond. So it wasn't a substantial undertaking, didn't cost very much. It was nearly free. All the food and everything, space was donated, but you had to have an invitation. You had to have a commitment for the community to come together. And these are just examples on the screen of other community conversations that have happened. In fact, we've been part of 140 of them in multiple states, mostly in rural communities. And we've seen some really interesting and really profound movements come at the local level when you just get the people in and outside of the system to come together and not talk about what's going wrong or what's challenging, but to think about what could we do as a community. So I'm just going to scroll through some other ways you might think about convening your own community in this way. For example, a number of our districts, school districts in our state, wanted to improve the quality of their career and transition services for students with disabilities. So their questions were, what are we already doing to prepare students with disabilities well for college, career, and community? What could we do better or differently to prepare students and their families? And how do we strengthen partnerships from beyond our school to improve outcomes for students? So anyone coming to that could answer those questions, and that began to generate ideas and potential partners in that particular community. And they held theirs in their school cafeteria. So this is what it looked like in one of those communities. Or maybe another series of events built around, in my own old hometown of Nashville, used a variation on these questions. What could we do to create more job opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities in their community? That was the first round. Then we switched tables. We repeated that question, but with new people that you were talking with. And then we switched tables again and asked, what resources can we put in place in the next 6 months to work towards this? And those conversations were also very generative and began to kind of, again, give us a roadmap for some things we never thought about ways of addressing transportation and mentoring and social connections outside of the workplace. We've worked with some school districts that wanted to focus on connecting every one of their students to early work experiences. So their questions were, what would it take for every student with a disability to have paid, meaningful job experience before leaving high school? That was also the second round question. And then what can each of us contribute to help students reach this goal? And so just really, I love that particular conversation because they knew of the strong connection between early work experiences and later work experiences, and they begin to focus on what can we do to begin to expand those opportunities early on as well. We've seen events focused also on independent living, for example. In a community just outside of Nashville, the conversation on it was on independent living, and what is the first round was, what does independent living mean to you? To understand, like, what was really the breadth of what that meant. It didn't always mean living on your own, but often meant finding ways of living in community with others outside of the family home. And then the second round was what supports, programs, and opportunities would help you to achieve your independent living goals. And then they repeated that again as people mixed tables and got more ideas. So again, really interesting and creative ideas that can come when you pose the questions in ways that are very asset and possibility focused. And the final example of that is just in this sort of area of congregational inclusion. I've had a few communities that have really focused on helping people be connected to and through the life of their local faith community, whether that's a church or synagogue or mosque or some other place of worship. And so their questions were, what could we do to include people with disabilities and their families well in the life of their faith community? What can we do to come alongside people with disabilities and their families in other areas of their life, the other 6 days of the week? And how could we support one another and new congregations in these areas? And so really ecumenical, even interfaith gathering focused around these possibilities. In this case, held in a church banquet hall. And again, very fruitful in terms of the kinds of ideas that came up of thinking outside of eligibility requirements and funding mechanisms and program constraints. You're unleashing creativity in your community. And then you're asking people to attend to say, could you be part of committing to helping move forward on some of those ideas? Out of every one of those events, you put together a little guide. It doesn't have to be fancy like these in terms of graphically designed. It can just be a list of every idea people shared that goes back to everyone who attended and people who couldn't come as well. So that they begin to see the possibilities in front of them. And as I was thinking about this webinar, I was thinking about the community conversation guide we just put together and posted on our website, not even last week, where the community conversation was on how can faith communities foster belonging for their members impacted by disability. So if you can even focus them on something as important but as broad as belonging. And so this guide walks through all kinds of ordinary and sometimes really creative ideas for how congregations can foster belonging. And that's available for free on our website. So that's congregations and communities. And of course, then there's also thinking about what happens in our schools before students even graduate. How do we think about creating opportunities for students to have the shared learning and fun activities that create connections, and out of those repeated connections lead to people getting picked as friends by one another. So peer-mediated approaches are pretty widely prevalent. A lot of schools adopt these. This might be efforts you're doing in your own local schools, but they're based on the premise that there is somewhat of a friendship formula. And I shared this in the first webinar as well, that friendships, although they're more art than science, are usually formed around shared activities with other people who share common interests or backgrounds, repeated over time. And in those activities, people have valued roles and just enough support to participate. That when these things are in place, when people are part of shared activities around common interests repeated over time, they tend to move from acquaintances to friendships. And this is why a good job can lead to belonging in points of connection. The shared activity is being in that work together around that common interest or focus of where you work, and that happens every week or twice a week or 3 times a week. And out of that, you come to know one another. But in the job, you have a valued role and hopefully enough support through natural supports or coworker supports or job coaching supports to be part of that place. Well, in the schools, often we accomplish that or we aim towards that friendship formula through a variety of peer-mediated supports. It might be peer support arrangements that take place in classrooms. It could be peer networks that are more social focused approaches that take place at lunch or in extracurriculars or other times of the school day, on recess for kids who are younger, or even peer partner programs, which sometimes go by peer-to-peer or peer buddy or best buddies kinds of programs that are more group-based approaches of connecting lots of students with and without disabilities together regularly over time in shared activities. When these not too complicated, very free supports that tap into the ubiquitous availability of other peers are in place, we start to see people get much more connected to the life of their school and the life of others. So peer support arrangements are one approach. If you have students who are involved in inclusive middle school or high school or even post-secondary classes, this involves pairing them with one or two other peers from that class who can provide ongoing academic, social, even behavioral support to a student with disabilities within typical classrooms. So these typically involve one or two peers who are invited and identified from the same class. There's a kind of an orientation to how they will provide practical and appropriate supports to their classmate. And then as the students begin to work together over the semester, they receive some guidance and support from a paraprofessional or a special educator or even a gen ed teacher. And as they work together and become more confident in their work together, that special educator or paraprofessional fades back their support over time as students become more independent and work together. We see this happen over and over with introducing peers with well-supported ways over time that kids become more engaged in their learning, and they do that alongside classmates who they often then develop relationships with. So there's a number of goals that these can accomplish. You can kind of see those on the right of the screen. Those are an approach that we often recommend for in the classroom, but you might also be thinking about how do we build connections at lunch or before or after school or in extracurriculars. And that's where peer network strategies can be particularly helpful. These are more group-based support models where a core group of maybe 3 to 6 peers come alongside a student with a developmental disability, and they meet regularly outside of class. And those peers are picked on the basis of having interests or other things in common with the student. So you're not looking for 3 to 6 peers who want to just provide support to a classmate with developmental disabilities. They're getting together because they all share a passion for the same sports team or a love for the same hobby or just some other interests or passions in common. They get together weekly or bi-weekly, maybe in the cafeteria or during lunch or in an empty classroom during an advisory period or an extracurricular or after school event. They meet together for an enjoyable activity. It might be eating a meal, playing a game, completing a service project. And there's an adult who's part of that who kind of facilitates their getting together, supports them as they work together, but also is looking for opportunities to fade back their support so that students are able to participate in those activities, enjoy their time together, but have the support they need or the guidance they need to participate fully, particularly for students who might have communication challenges or more extensive support needs. But over time, that network then sort of fades. The structure of that network gives way as friendships form and people just begin to get together naturally. So again, on the right are some examples of a number of potential benefits that might come out of networks. But if these intrigue you, they're again just a way of thinking about natural supports in the school that can lead to shared opportunities for joint activities that lead often to new relationships. If you're wanting to learn more about this too, we have lots of free resources on this approach as well. That is, again, a way of thinking about fostering belonging, of being present together, of knowing one another, of befriending one another, and through those interactions coming to need and love one another. So I hope this is helpful in terms of just kind of giving you a glimpse at some creative but simple ways you can tap into the natural networks in your community and invite them to be part of creating communities of belonging for young people on the cusp of adulthood. Maybe a glimpse of what that might look like by tapping into congregational connections or larger community connections, or just the peer connections that already exist in your local high school or community college or other kinds of college contexts. these are all have to be intentional efforts. As we talked about last time, relationships don't always happen automatically. Sometimes we have to structure the opportunities and ensure the support so that people can come together in meaningful ways. But out of that, that gives the opportunity for the kinds of shared activities where students really can come to know one another better, to come to support one another better, to listen to and hear one another better, and then ultimately to accept and befriend and meet and love one another. So hopefully this gives you some ideas of what this might look like in your community. Again, not as a recipe, but as a way to provoke your imagination and think about who in your midst might you approach and draw into these kinds of conversations to begin to make the movements that make most sense for your particular town, your particular county, your particular context. So hopefully this is exciting that imagination, and I'll pause here to see in our last few minutes whether there's questions or reactions to this introduction of possibilities. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. This is Kim, and I don't see any questions in yet. We will give a couple of more minutes to see if people have questions or comments they would like to add. For myself, I will say my imagination is definitely provoked and excited. I so much appreciate the examples that you shared today. I think it's so helpful to hear concrete ways that we can take this information and move it forward. I do have a few closing remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Teresa to see if any questions have come in. Sure. I put the link to our short evaluation in the chat or question box. Please do take a few minutes to fill that out. The link will come to you again tomorrow in a follow-up email from GoToWebinar. So if you don't have a chance to complete it today, you'll get that link again tomorrow, but we really do want your feedback. We currently do not have other webinars scheduled, but as soon as we get more scheduled, we announce those on our website, and we also send the webinar information to our Montana Transition email list. So be watching for future offerings. Again, the recordings for the November 1st session with Dr. Carter, as well as today's session, will be posted to our Transition and Employment Projects training page. And I've put the website address for that in the chat or question box. It will probably be a week and a half or so before we get those posted. Huge thank you to Dr. Carter for the wonderful information in both of these webinars, to Teresa for moderating, and to our captioning and interpreting professionals. We really value the opportunity to host accessible webinars using your expertise. So thank you again to our captioning and interpreting professionals. Thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. We are thrilled that you're here to hear this information. And Teresa, I'll be quiet and turn it over to you in case things have come in the question box.
Thank you, Kim. This is Teresa Baldry. Just a couple questions. One being, will you be sending these slides to the participants? Kim, if you'd like to answer that.
Yes, the slides are currently available in the handouts section on your GoToWebinar dashboard. We will also have them posted to our website. They should be posted by tomorrow, and then the recording will take a little bit longer. But yes, they will be available. They are not sent out to attendees. We don't have an easy way to do that, but you can access them on our website.
And then the second is just a comment. What an excellent presentation, and that excellent was all caps, and very thought-provoking. I do discovery and transition work, and you just opened up lots of thoughts in my head that are firing and wiring. Wow, thank you. And then an additional thank you, Dr. Carter.
Thanks, Teresa. And in the resources that we shared, everything I talked about are resources of how to do them step by step with lots more examples. So just kind of turn you loose to explore those and think about what might make sense in your community. And glad to field questions by email or later on if you try these out and want to know a little bit more. Don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much. And to any audience members, if for some reason you're not able to download the handouts from GoToWebinar today, and if you're not able to access them on our website in a day or two when we have them posted, email me and I will make sure that you get them. This is Kim Brown again. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Carter. Have a lovely rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.